Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
Breeze hits it in the air to center. We will see you tomorrow night.
This is the Viva Alberto's podcast on SB Nation. Welcome into another episode of the Viva Alberto's podcast. Tonight we are doing the February edition of the Reader Mailbag. Tonight with me I have writers Gabe Simons and Adam Akbani and site manager Heather. How are you all doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I think that's the first time you got my last name right.
Yes. We're making progress. We're moving forward.
I'm doing good.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for submitting all of your wonderful questions. The few of you that understood the assignment, we do greatly appreciate it, and we do have some really good ones to get to tonight. And we're gonna kick it off with Huey RVA. Your question was, I saw an article about college baseball doing a great job of player development, as good or better than the minor leagues. How do you guys feel about that? And that leads to another question, so it's a two-parter. Should the Cardinals target a position of need out of college with the number 5 pick this year? And if there is a college right-handed hitting center fielder ranked in the top 10, is that the obvious pick? Could you expect him to be in the majors fairly quickly, as soon as 26 or 27? I'll throw it over to you, Adam. I'll let you start it off. What do you think on those two? Is college baseball basically to be considered just another minor league level at this point of its development, or is it still, in my mind, I'll let you answer in just a second, but is it more about the level of competition when you get to the minor leagues than it is about, being in college baseball?
Well, I mean, it really depends on what conference you're in. So if you're in the SEC versus, like Conference USA, right? I mean, obviously it's Division I, but there is something about the SEC and really all sports. I mean, kind of not to get too sidetracked, but we see how Mizzou is doing with college basketball and how difficult the SEC is in basketball this year. It really depends on, like I said, what conference you're in. And not just the SEC in general, you also have the ACC. So it's very much obviously a minor league preparation level. So when we consider what does that mean, right? So for your high level conferences, your really good teams, your Vanderbilts of the world, your Wake Forests of the world, those guys, the level of competition they're playing is probably comparable to about single A baseball. And your best prospects are probably going to go out there and compete in high A, and those are like your top tier prospects. So think Travis Bazzana from last year, your Charlie Condons, your Jack Caglionis at the plate, not on the mound. So in that regard, I would argue that it's a good player development system in that perspective, where you're getting top tier talent being funneled into those schools from the best prep schools in the country. You see, like Wake Forest has that pitching lab and baseball analytics lab at their sites in North Carolina, and it's arguably one of the best in the country, right? But if you compare that to, let's say, I don't know, Liberty University, I'm going to take, Wake Forest or an actual team, and they're built like the hundreds of millions of dollars they have at their disposal, or maybe tens of millions, to actually spend on player developments rather than, just some regular university out there. Wake Forest is obviously the major exception to that. There are not many schools that I would argue are up there in terms of player development and can just churn out top tier talent. But I would say that 100% there are schools that I would maybe take that have it a little bit more figured out than even some professional teams from a model perspective. But even then, even like the worst of the worst teams, they're much better than any college team you can think of. As for that second part of that question, I would probably just go best player available. This Cardinals farm system is still one of the not one of the worst, but towards the bottom, trending down, maybe somewhat upwards in terms of where they're heading. But I would pick best player available. So I mean, what does that mean? We're looking at guys. I would argue that maybe a Jay Laviolette is out of the question. He's probably going to go 1-1 or 1-2. Wahia Aloy might be a guy that they can consider taking. Jamie Arnold might be out of reach. Tyler Bremer might be out of reach. Ethan Holiday might be out of reach. Those are a few names. And that's good because if we end up with the Cardinals end up with any one of those players or maybe someone a little down the line like a Dean Curley or a Kason Cunningham or Billy Carlson, et cetera, I would be a very happy camper. So it really just depends, best player available for a franchise that doesn't have a lot of talent at any specific position and could really just use the replenishment anywhere with any top tier talent.
Yeah, Gabe, you want to jump in on this topic as well?
Sure. I'll start with the best player available. That would definitely be my pick because first off, and I know like at 5, they're expected to make the majors sooner than just about anybody else drafted, but you still don't really know what you're going to actually need by the time they make the major leagues. For example, if we would have drafted based on like need in like, I don't know, 2016 or 17, and we thought, oh, we need a center fielder, but Bader was in the minors the whole time, and suddenly Bader's an elite defender. And so you got to just draft the best player available and figure it out as it goes along because a lot of these guys, they might take 2 to 3 years, and that's an eternity in baseball, quite honestly. And I don't have much to add to the college baseball talk, except for maybe that, the better they are at developing, probably the more relevant the draft becomes, because then you'll have guys who will make the majors fairly quickly, which is the thing that kind of holds back the MLB draft is that a lot of guys drafted. It's hard to get people excited about people who will most likely not work out, A, and B, will take multiple years just to get a sampling of the games, and they might not even be good right away. So if they're better at developing, that means they're going to majors faster, which would be great. So I think that's something we probably should root for, honestly. And that's my thoughts on that multi-part question.
Yeah, Heather, you wanna throw your 2 cents over here?
Sure. I don't have much more to add. I think that's kind of a common draft, especially with baseball adage of you pick the best player available. I've heard that multiple times. I think because you have that long sort of tail of when you're going to see those players, you can't really draft. It's not like the NFL draft where you draft for an immediate need because you're not filling a need immediately. Sometimes you take those players and turn them into whatever your need was or is. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know a whole lot about the players in the draft. That's not really my forte.
Don't worry, Heather, we got you.
Yeah. That's not usually something I keep tabs on until it gets a little bit closer and I can single in on like ones that people are talking about. But I've written a little bit about prospects this off season, and what it seems to me, at least when I was writing about the international draft signees, which are like 16, 17-year-olds, a lot of the scouting notes kind of are repeating the same thing over and over again. Looks like body type might fill out, athletic at shortstop, or has power potential. It's like the same things over and over again, which either makes me think it's like a sampling thing where players that are likely to be signed have these key things about them, or scouts kind of are just doing their best at guessing and they use the same phrases.
Right.
And it might be a combination of the two. So I think you have a safer bet at picking a college player, obviously, because they're more developed. And there are some schools that are known for being better at developing players than others. But then you have that chance that you could get that lightning in a bottle with those younger players and train them up yourself, right?
Right, right. So the way that I would attack these questions, and I kind of led into it in the beginning, was I agree with where you have your assessment at, Adam. I think that single A is probably a good focal point to kind of stick to when it comes to like the highest of college baseball, which looks like the SEC is the most upper echelon of college baseball available. And I would agree they're probably right around in line with single A. For me, I think that the best way to kind of evaluate where a player is based off of, how he's performing against the level of competition he's going against. So like you said, if he's in the SEC, he's playing against the best of the best and he's, standing out and performing, that's generally a good indicator of that player may be a quick mover through the system. He may be, better than his peers and is capable of moving quickly through the minor leagues. As far as it being something that can essentially be a feeder to the major leagues, I mean, you generally only get maybe two players a year that are almost essentially MLB ready out of the chute. I mean, if you think about 2 years ago, you had Paul Skeens, who was basically ready to go out of college, but that's like the outlier. That's not the expectation. I know that we've seen the Angels specifically maybe more as a franchise, their motivation to get players to the major leagues quicker. You look at a Nolan Shanuel or a Zach Neto, and even now their pick last year, I believe, is Christian Moore out of Tennessee, who just absolutely lit up the minor leagues, and he looks like he's going to be competing for a chance, an outside chance at making the opening day lineup as well. So like it also could fall into a realm of where that's kind of how teams view it. But as far as how the Cardinals have gone, and we've kind of heard about this recently too, is that Chaim Bloom likes to overcook his prospects. And I know that he isn't technically in charge yet, but as far as like what to prepare for going forward, it seems like it's going to be a situation where whoever the Cardinals do end up drafting and developing, you may feel like, all of the signs, all the underlying metrics, everything is pointing to them being ready, but they're going to continue to let them develop even if they show that they're already ready and let them overdevelop. That's just kind of his, the way that he approaches it. And hopefully with all of the investments that the Cardinals have made into the minor league staff and that development, that they do end up getting back to when we saw the Cardinals at their peak and elevating prospects to the major leagues. They were fully ready. They were fully formed. They were ready to hit the ground running from the moment that they got to the major leagues. So if we're getting back to that, then there's not necessarily an emphasis or push to make sure that whoever they draft at 5 will get there quickly, just based on the newer philosophy that's going to be taking over. Should the Cardinals target a position need out of college at number 5? That's not typically how they address it. Like these guys said, it's generally in baseball, you draft best player available, and based off of that, it doesn't even necessarily, you don't have to worry about positions so much. You're just really looking for the best athlete available. I know so many people get hung up on like, oh, they drafted another shortstop. Well, that doesn't necessarily matter, just because the shortstop is generally the best athlete on any given field, and he has a much wider range of outcomes that he could branch off and perform up at other positions. And so that's kind of where that philosophy comes from. You heard Adam reference, a Billy Carlson, or there's even an Avia Arquette, or a couple other names that are shortstops that may not necessarily end up at shorts. They're good enough to play shortstop, but if they get to the major leagues and whatever team drafts them already has an established shortstop, they can move off of shortstop, and you can feel really good about where they play at defensively. So you're not necessarily worried about what position they play when they're drafted. You're just simply looking for the best athlete, the best position, the highest upside, the best tools, et cetera, whatever teams value most in their draft prospects. So let's move on to our next question. This comes to us from THP0344, and Gabe, I'm going to throw this one over to you first this time. How does everyone feel about the offseason? Did you expect different after the end of the year press conference? And if so, what did you feel changed to their path? And he goes on to say, not everyone agrees, but it seems they laid out a clear vision of sacrificing wins in 2025 for development and then quietly walked that back the rest of the winter. I'm curious if you guys feel the same way. So Gabe, I'll throw it over to you first. How did you feel about the offseason, and what do you feel changed their path?
Well, what changed their path is pretty clear, which is they were not able to trade Nolan Arenado. And in essence, that's kind of like the only thing I really expected of the offseason. I wasn't expecting to make signings. Um, and I'm not sure, like the main, I guess, drawback of not trading Arenado is that Thomas Ajacey doesn't really get to play as much as maybe the Cardinals would like. And Nolan Gorman doesn't get to play third base, obviously. Those two things are unfortunate for sure. I mean, I'm not really sure what it looks like if you accept the premise that Nolan Arenado will not get traded because they can't find a partner and Arenado doesn't want to go to most teams, which are both true. I don't know if you saw some photos of Arenado in spring training. He looked happy to be there. I mean,
Yep.
you can't read into that kind of thing, but like that's I know it just seems like he's perfectly happy being a Cardinal. He just was like, oh well, if you can find some team that is going to give me a good chance at a championship, okay, I'll move, but I'm fine here. And so, like, if you accept that Arenado's not getting traded, I don't know what a different offseason necessarily looks like because you don't want to trade like, and I know this is a later question, not to spoil, but you don't want to trade like Brendan Donovan. Like, if you think you're going to win in the next few years, like all the other options to trade are basically guys under team control, as far as I can see. So I don't know what a different offseason looks like. So I'm not like disappointed because I understand why they didn't do exactly what they wanted to do. And I still think it looks very similar to what the plan was. Just you would expect more moves to get to that plan. That's the only difference for me.
Right. Heather, your thoughts on the offseason and if what do you feel changed their path this offseason?
I feel like we've talked about this a lot, but I think it's because it's an interesting thing to think about. The team came out in the beginning of the off season, kind of giving us this vision of what their plan was, and then to us it seems like they didn't exactly follow through on it. I think a couple things led to that, although I don't know how, like when they knew that those things were going to happen. For one, they couldn't trade away most of their veteran starters. So that would be like Wilson Contreras and Sonny Gray. They didn't want to go. Nolan Arenado was more amenable to it, but he also, I don't really think, wanted to leave either. Uh, and I can't blame them. On a human level, no one likes to move, that uproot their families and their
You ain't
livelihoods.
kidding.
So I think if you look at it that way, it makes a lot of sense that Nolan Arenado doesn't want to move for just a lateral move because why would he do that?
Right.
So I think that's kind of, we've talked about it a lot, but I think that's a big thing that altered the trajectory of their off season. But they also didn't do much besides that because they could have possibly, if they were really committed to this sort of almost retooling, rebuild. That's the thing is they never really said the word rebuild, and I think maybe we've seen all these sort of bottom up rebuilds, I guess is what it would be, where they tear everything down and start over. And so that's maybe what people were picturing. That's not really the Cardinals style, so I was never really picturing that myself. But they could have traded away a Helsley or Fetty, and they didn't. So, so I don't think a rebuild was ever really in the cards. um, so I think I don't know how much it really altered their plans if this wasn't. I think the main thing they want to do was trade away Arenado if they could find it, but I don't even think that was a big concern. I think they were always prepared to go into the season with Nolan Arenado as their third baseman. And I've said this a few times, but it's not a bad spot to be in. The only thing is the kind of a sunk cost sort of uh situation, or that's not the right word. What is the right word? Uh, Opportunity cost of not getting to
Yeah.
play these younger players and give them playing time, but they're still going to get playing time. So I think it's okay. I actually don't feel as bad about the off season as maybe a lot of other people do. I kind of feel more energized about baseball than I have in a long time. I don't exactly know what that is, like why, but I feel like they're putting their efforts into the right places with the drafting and developing, and they got a top 7 pick in 2024 and got JJ Weatherholt with that, and then they're going to have a top 5 pick this the upcoming draft. There's just a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon for them, and I think it would be a little pessimistic to just feel too negatively about this off season when you have so many good things coming. You don't want to like tank, I guess, right before when you have all this these opportunities coming your way. So, and there's still the mid-season trade deadline if they did really want to move players, and that might even be a more opportunistic time to move them anyway. So I don't feel too bad about it, and you guys shouldn't either. I think it'll be fine.
All right, Adam, I know you're chomping at the bit. Let's hear it.
No, I mean, I don't want to say that I kind of saw this coming, but I don't know. Maybe I was finally thinking, you know what? Maybe they're finally going to actually try to make a deal and try to retool and not feel super egotistical about it, because there really isn't any shame in indulging in a rebuild slash tanking kind of idea, because, you know, maybe like I said, this franchise is 130 something years old, and it's not really in the Cardinals' MO to do that. But if they were to shed guys off, and I know this is a future question in the show, like a Sonny Gray or a Wilson Contreras or a Ryan Helsley or an Eric Fetty, they could get quite a bit for them. I know Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras have some money on the books, so it might take a little tinkering and some reholding of some of their salary in order to make a trade more appetizing for a contender. But that's something I'd be willing to entertain. Obviously, I'm not the one who's dishing out the checks like Bill DeWitt III is, or I guess Junior. But in this scenario, I don't know. I kind of expected them to kind of at least try to do something. I figured a trade for every single one of those guys would probably come, like Heather said, at the deadline. But they were really hyping up a Nolan Arenado trade, and to see that fall flat on its back, and to see Arenado head into the season as a Cardinal, I don't want to say it's frustrating because I like Nolan Arenado. I don't think he's a red jacket candidate just simply because if we think about what kind of caliber player that entails, I think he had one really nice season, but I think it entails having a few more string together in order to do that. Anyway, the return for Arenado, these guys are professionals, right? As much as we like to hoot and holler against Mozeliak and some of these other guys, they know what they're doing. It might be some, in general, in terms of negotiation, obviously strategy for rebuilding a team is a different scenario. But in terms of the art of the deal, I would argue that there's probably, if we saw the inside of it, there probably isn't a whole lot that appetized the Cardinals in terms of a trade. So it probably was a 40 FV prospect or two for a guy like Nolan Arenado, who can still go out and give you 3 WAR, obviously defensive first, over the next couple of seasons throughout his remaining contract. And that's suitable for a contender. And I think they could probably garner a little bit more. I will confess and concess that I think that they might have been hesitant to eat some of his salary, which would have made the return a lot better. Maybe they can get a true big leaguer in return or a young guy, but I still don't think that would entail having a nice trade, at least right now. So if they're gonna wait till the deadline to shed all these players, that's fine. I think a Ryan Helsley move would have been entertaining to see, but It is what it is. These guys have a lot more information than we could ever even dream of. And I think the Cardinals fan base loses sight of that at times, including myself. So looking forward towards the deadline this July, I would love to see these guys still traded, no matter how frustrating it's been that we haven't seen really anything happen this offseason, let alone a retank or rebuild or retool.
Wow. That was way more measured than I was expecting. I'm proud of you, Adam.
Thank you.
For me, how do I feel about the offseason? I mean, from the standpoint that I cover the team and I try to create content regarding the team, it was a really frustrating offseason. I don't know if you guys felt the same way that I did or not, but it was pretty hard. It was pretty hard not to have something to talk about, right? And so like that part sucked. But at the end of the season press conference, yes, I mean, I'll be truthful. Yes, I did expect the offseason to go differently, and I wrote about it as such with my first article that I submitted with Viva Alberto's. And, you know, just a quick little, aside that my article coming out on Tuesday will be revisiting that first article and judging how poorly I did on that. So we can all throw Rotten Tomatoes at me in public for being absolutely awful at that. At the end of the season, at the press conference, Mo openly talked about payroll going down, being a lack of unsurety about the TV deal and the whole situation with Diamond Sports. Obviously, all of those things worked out and probably better than they had initially expected or were even sure about. They've announced a direct-to-consumer streaming option for fans who live in market to get games for $19.99 a month, or I think it was like $180 a year. Not bad on prices. It's pretty affordable for the average consumer. It's harder to afford with everything else that everyone pays for nowadays, but that's a different conversation for a different subject. But my point being is, he hadn't talked to Wilson Contreras or Sonny Gray going into the offseason yet. He had conversations with Nolan Arenado, and Nolan Arenado said, if you can find me a spot on one of these 5 teams, he says, then I'll accept a deal. But like Adam mentioned, he's had an aspiration and spoken publicly about being a Red Jacket member one day. That's something that matters to him. He worked so hard to make sure that he ended up in St. Louis on the Cardinals and to facilitate that deal and make it happen. They put a lot of effort into that. And so I understand why he would say, I'm comfortable here. I want to be here. But if you can find me a situation based off of what the direction of the team is going forward, then if I can go to a true legitimate contender who I know or he feels in his heart of hearts will be in the playoffs come October and gives him that opportunity to chase that ring as he, starts to delve into his mid 30s at this point, it makes sense. And I totally get it from a professional standpoint and how he would want to view that. But at the end of the day, he's fine here. He's comfortable here. He's familiar with playing in St. Louis, and all of his comments today made it sound like it's pretty well water under the bridge and that he's just ready to go out and focus on being the best version of himself. I know that we, in our text chat, we had kind of talked about, I'm going off on an Arenado tangent and I'll get back to the off-season part in just a second. But, he talked about his explosiveness training and things of that nature. And I can only imagine with how hot this guy burns for intensity in terms of like wanting to perform, that he's not going to take everything that was said about him this offseason in terms of whether the Cardinal fans were in his mentions saying that, he's washed up, he's no good, get rid of him, all this, that, and the next. I'm certain he was looking at some of it, and that's bulletin board material, and that's going to be feeding him throughout the season. And I'm also certain that he looks in the mirror and is well aware of his lack of production led to the Cardinals not making the playoffs last season as well. And so I can also imagine that motivates him to, prove everyone wrong again. And so a guy who, yes, he is starting to decline in age and performance, but can we see a rebound? We have seen this from players before. I'm not saying Nolan Arenado is Albert Pujols, but we've seen guys into their mid to late 30s who have found a little bit of fountain of youth and kind of turned back the clock and performed at a level beyond what was expected of them. I'm not necessarily saying I expect that, but I'm not going to say it's not out of the range of outcomes to be possible. And so that's kind of where I am on Nolan Arenado. As far as like everything else goes, Sonny Gray wants to be here. He said he still is not convinced at winter warmup. He said he's not convinced this team can't still win. Wilson Contreras openly said he would feel like a coward if he had left before or in the middle of his contract, and his stated goal when signing the contract in St. Louis that he wanted to make sure that the Cardinals were a better team after he left than when he got there. And so with those things in mind, they aren't going anywhere, at least for the time being. Ryan Helsley, I thought, was a good opportunity to move and sell high. You know, there's a lot of risk involved in taking him into season, but you can think of a lot of worse things than having a top 3 closer in baseball at the back end of games. And if he can, you know, build on what he did last season, prove his health, prove that he's still just as dominant. If the Cardinals are out of it or just kind of so-so, you know, middle of the pack and not really taking advantage of their opportunity, they can still get a haul at the deadline for him. And that's not an issue. It's that I'm worried that he's going to break. Relievers are volatile. Their outcomes vary from year to year. It happens. But the Cardinals are rolling the dice on it, and we just kind of have to accept that that's where it is. Eric Fetty could probably get you something nice. If Miles Michaelis and Steven Matz have decent first half, they don't have to have great first half, but we always see at the deadline that teams are starved for starting pitching. And could any number of them use a back-end starter, you know, at the deadline? Potentially. And so with that being in mind, there becomes a mid-season point where the reset starts to take over a little bit more than at the beginning of the season. And that's kind of how I viewed how things changed as they realized that these veteran players didn't necessarily want to be moved out of St. Louis, at least in the offseason, and maybe they weren't necessarily finding the deals they wanted for some of their other veteran pieces as they were just having conversations with other teams. Then they kind of kick the can down the road and they say, well, we've got all of this veteran talent here. Let's, you know, see what happens in the first half of the season and kind of go from there. And I can understand the logic behind that. And also, you know, Heather, you made mention of this is St. Louis. They don't really do tank jobs here in St. Louis. That's probably in the back of their mind as well. They still have to put butts in seats, get people, you know, fans interested and excited to come back to the ballpark. They continuously talk about their investment what is necessary from a fan's perspective and gate revenue coming through this turnstiles and sitting in Busch Stadium, taking in seats, taking in games, all of that nature. That's still important to them. And so having at least interesting enough quality product on the field to watch is important to them. And I think that they've kind of convinced themselves that this isn't so bad, and I think based on the number that they got back on the TV deal, that it wound up being better than they expected, and they weren't as like pressed to do something further. And you know, Mo and the DeWitts both confirmed that at winter warmup that they don't have to cut any further in terms of salary to carry this team into season. So I think at first there was a lot of uncertainty, and then what changed was they got more certainty and they realized that they can kind of kick the can down the road and kind of push that reset back a little bit further. Now, the part about this that sucks from my perspective is, yes, I mean, I still think they're going to find at-bats for Nolan Gorman in some capacity, whether it's second base, DH, what have you, but that's going to, like we talked about with Katie Woo, that's probably going to cut into some of Alec Burleson's at-bats. That's probably going to, realize that Thomas Sajaci is probably going to start the season in AAA. It might even mean, because then if you're moving Donovan to left field and Newt to center, which has been kind of talked about in some Cardinal circles, that, excuse me, that Victor Scott might be, an unfortunate, like, and with lack of a better term, a kind of a cap casualty, and gets sent back to AAA where he can play every day, even if he shows that he's ready to go. I'm not sure. Then injury might play into it. So, I mean, there's a lot of different factors, and we have to get through spring before that becomes reality. But the unfortunate thing is some of the young players that we might have been more interested or intrigued to see get, a lion's share of the playing time may not get that because of the ripple effects of not moving out some of these veterans. But again, that can kind of come mid-season. We've seen the ability to evaluate talent on a 2-month plus, stretch basis down the stretch if they're out of it, yada, yada, yada. It's kind of still a wait and see mode as unfortunate as that is. All right. Our next question comes to us from Blue84, and he's going to start off by saying he knows that the Cardinals won't, but would it make sense to trade Brendan Donovan, especially if they're going to be holding on to Nolan Arenado? With multiple young guys needing time on the infield, it seems he's the one guy that it could make sense to trade and would bring back a good return. And that is a great transition by me, because that's exactly what I was just talking about a little bit. And you guys have already made reference to it, so we're going to dive into it right now. Heather, I'm going to start with you on this question. Would it make sense to trade Brendan Donovan at this current juncture?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because it kind of is the opposite of what they were saying they wanted to do, right? And then they couldn't trade Arenado. Brendan Donovan's the kind of player I think that they want to give more playing time to. I suppose they could. I don't think. I guess here's the bottom line for me. I don't think the Cardinals want to do a rebuild. If they did, then maybe that would be something they would pursue. But I don't think they want to do like a true rebuild, like how we envision a rebuild might be. Then they say retool. I think that's exactly what they mean. I think they wanted to sell off a few pieces here and there and build up some prospects and younger players, and then give the younger players playing time. I don't see them trading someone like Brendan Donovan. I think they're gonna, depending on how they do, which maybe they'll surprise us and be in first place in the deadline. Who knows? But depending on how they do, I think they're going to still be looking to trade Arenado. And that's what I think the avenue they'd rather go is shed some of the payroll. I don't think they're going to. Brendan Donovan's still cost controlled, right? I don't even know how much he's making, but I don't think that would be
2.9, I think, or is it 2.8? I know he got 100,000 less than Newt Bar.
Finger says 2.8.
2.8. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't see them doing that, but I'm curious to hear what everyone else has to say, because maybe I am missing some cool opportunity by being so close-minded.
Yeah. Okay. Adam, give us your thoughts, man.
So I don't want to say that it's my rule of thumb, because other teams have done this, a la the Marlins, where if they've got a guy with maybe 2 or 3 years of team control left and they're probably not in a situation to be contending anytime soon, it would make a lot of sense to probably move that player and see what they can get for them in the open market, right? I think a contender would love to see a guy like Brendan Donovan on their team, especially with 3 years, I guess 2.5 years of team control left at the time of the deadline in July. Because I mean, let's face it, the way we see the Cardinals right now, let's be 100% honest. Do we really believe that they're going to be contending 3 years from now? Maybe.
Yes.
Okay. So I personally it's a toss up for me. So you take that and you combine that with the fact, like we've said a million times before, their farm system isn't the best. I think it would behoove them to at least cater to the market, take phone calls and see what they could get for a guy like Brendan Donovan. Because at least right now, next year, it's just not going to happen unless there's some devil magic that happens. The year after, maybe. The year after that is probably the most optimistic, but then Brendan Donovan would be on his last year of team control, which would, if they're doing well, they're going to hold on to him. But if they're not doing well, he'll have half a year to a year of team control left, and they would get a lot less than what they would be getting if they were to move him sooner rather than later at that time in 2027, I think is what it is, right? So I'm not negating Gabe's point. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be contending. They very well could be. But if I had to put it up against, if there was a gun held to my head, I would say they're probably not going to. And if they are, there's probably going to be other pieces that they need in order to be put into that equation for them to be contending. And I just don't see it right now.
I think
there's too many questions with the farm system. There's too many questions with the lineup. There's too many questions with the rotation all around. I just don't see it, at least at this moment. I would need further evidence, and we've got 3 years to figure this out.
I think it's important to like define how you define contending.
Well,
contending for the playoffs or contending for the World Series, I guess is what I'm asking is like, what's your definition? Because I can see them contending for the playoffs a lot sooner than they would be contending for a World Series.
Yeah. The second, third wild card now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was this a question for me or for the field?
For you. That's what you were saying. So like the way that I'm interpreting what you're saying is you would be open to it just because you don't feel like he fits the timeline of when they're going to be at their competitive peak again. And so that's what I'm asking is like, you use the word contending as kind of like a blanket. So I'm trying to, further understand, is it contending for the playoffs or contending for the World Series? Is that's your threshold there?
Right. So Blake and I had this discussion on a podcast a while back, where the math has obviously changed in the past couple of years with the extra wild card spots being added. Instead of being a 90 to 95 win team in order to solidify your place in the playoffs, you really need to be an 85 to 90 win team. I would still argue that you don't want to play for the bottom end. You want to build your team such that you're going to project your squad to win at least 90 or more games, ideally more. And it's obviously very, very difficult to do, but I'm not of the mindset of constructing a roster and patchworking it to try to get yourself to 85 wins and then have the playoffs be the crapshoot that it mathematically is. So if we see it right now, this is probably a 75, around 50 percentile, 75 to 80 win team. And even then, that's not good enough to push the envelope into the wild card contention and the very bare minimum that it would require to get into the playoffs. So there's, let alone the world. I guess by your words, Jake, to take what you said literally, I guess the World Series would be 90 to 95, and then playoff would just be 85 to 90. What Blake said is a lot of merit, that you just need to get into the dance, and then from there, anything happens. I would just rather construct a team to the point where you feel very comfortable that, hey, this is a World Series contender. Think your LA Dodgers, think your New York Yankees, think hypothetically your New York Mets. Now you got Soto and a couple of other pieces there. Maybe your Texas Rangers on a good season, your Atlanta Braves. Those kinds of squads, I think, are built to be World Series contenders. And then you've got that lower tier with the guys that are 85 to 90 wins. I would want to bang with the big guys. I mean, yes, you can shoot, and that's what the Cardinals did try to do last year by adding Eric Fetty and trying to get Tommy Pham. But I just think that this team is about 10, at least 10, if not more, 15 wins away from me really saying, okay, this is a roster that I feel comfortable full sending. I think right now there's too much work to be done, and it starts at the grassroots with the farm system, with the young controlled talent. It's just not there. That's why I'm for pressing the reset button completely, regardless of what the MO is.
You think they're a couple all-star caliber players away from being considered contenders?
Not just all-star caliber players, but good players all around the diamonds. I mean, I guess they've got a decent roster in that sense, but I guess, yeah, maybe a few all-star caliber players away.
Well, by your words, I'm not trying to pick a fight or anything. I'm just saying you said 10 to 15. So if you added 2 5-win players, which are all-star caliber players, they would be within your realm of what you would consider to possibly be at least a playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 10 to 15 wins above, not replacement, but whatever guys they have at the respective positions that may not be. And like we can look at we can check roster resource to see who those guys may be. I mean, maybe your center field is a very important position of need, with Victor Scott maybe not projecting to be the best player, I would argue. Ivan Herrera it was very good last year as a young player, but there's still a question mark at catcher, I would argue, despite me being high on Ivan. Jordan Walker is a toss-up. We don't know what's going to happen in right field. Lars Nootbaar is good when he's healthy, and that's a big question mark. Alec Burleson, is a good player, but he's only a DH and doesn't provide a lot of value on the field.
A platoon DH
so
at that.
Those guys are 1-win players on average. The guys that I just mentioned, Ivan Herrera was a 2-win guy. So they're a few all-stars away in some of those solidified, and it's just not there. Maybe catcher, but center field is just not there. And even Jordan Walker, we don't know what's going to happen with him. That's my argument.
Sure. Gabe, your thoughts? Would it make sense to trade Brendan Donovan?
I don't think so. And I've got a couple of reasons. One of them is that a lot of the future of the Cardinals' success or failure rides on Jordan Walker specifically, Nolan Gorman a little bit, Mason Wynn, to some extent Victor Scott, depending on how high you are on him, and how quickly they do or do not break out. Quickly lets us know how soon the Cardinals will be contending. So if Jordan Walker has another year where we're like, oh, he can't field, then he's just like a slightly above average hitter, he's not going to move the needle, then you have a little bit more information that our window is going to take longer. But if Jordan Walker comes out and say hits for a 150 weighted runs created plus, and suddenly he's like a star out of nowhere, not out of nowhere because of his prospect pedigree, but if he just becomes a star all of a sudden, well, then all of a sudden, well, we might be able to contend this year, depending on your definition of contend, but we might be able to contend like really soon, and Donovan will be under team control for that. So I feel like you got to wait to see what the young guys do and if they break out or not. And if they don't break out, well, then you could sell them then. And I realize that will lower his cost. I also don't happen to think Brendan Donovan is the type of player who is going to get the value you would necessarily want. I don't feel like those utility guys return what you would think in a trade or even necessarily in the open market. And I looked at one of the examples you referenced the Marlins, who let's be honest, they do it because they have salary. They don't do it because it happens to coincide with the fact that they're not going to compete, but they do it because they don't want to pay Jazz Chisholm specifically. And I just looked at his trade and they got a 50 future value, 45 plus, and then a guy who's like 18 or 19 in rookie ball. And I don't think Donovan would get the return that Chisholm did. And I just don't think like the opportunity cost of missing out on that. That doesn't do anything for me. It's like, oh, we missed a chance to get a top 100 catching prospect, which is what one of them was, and then 45 plus guy and middle infielder, and then a guy who's 18. So I just, part of me just doesn't think Donovan would return what we would hope, as far as like, you'd really want to get blown away by a trade for Donovan, in my opinion. And I just don't think that would happen. And the Cardinals very clearly, and me and Jake, where I went to warm up, value his leadership.
Like, big time.
Degree. Like, they're not trading him. I'll just say that. Whoever wonders if we're going to trade him, they're not going to trade him. Everybody talks about his leadership. Everybody talks about his leadership in interviews. They sometimes go out of their way to talk about his leadership. And he's a future manager if he wants to be, because he's every quote sounds like a manager to me. So this is a non-starter conversation for me, for Donovan specifically. Newbar would be an interesting one, but just because I don't see the Cardinals trading him. They may even extend him at some point because that's how much he's valued in the clubhouse from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah, if they can extend Donovan, that'd be huge. I just don't know if that's in the math, right?
Yeah, I don't know what their plans are with him. I wouldn't be surprised with an extension though, just based off the fact that he's got some off the field qualities that the players certainly value, and I know Marmol does and Mosaic does, probably Bloom as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if they extend him or try to extend him at some point. But, as a player like him, I can see why they're not doing it yet, because his skills could fall off. You want to be sure that he's closer to free agency maybe before you're like, okay, we feel reasonably confident you're going to age well.
Yeah, I'm right along the same lines as you, Gabe. If you're talking about it from the standpoint of you're just trying to gather value for him, and that's your reasoning for trading Brendan Donovan, I guess explore what you could get, but I'm not eager to pull the trigger on any deal that involves him, for one. And for two, let's talk about how important he is in the clubhouse, like Gabe referenced. You and I sat in those chairs and listened to him speak, and my goodness, I was ready to run through a wall after hearing him speak. Like, that dude is an awesome public speaker, and he's also really inspirational. I honestly, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Matthew McConaughey in just the way that he talks and just his inspirational words behind him too. And he's very, heavily involved with like veterans, and he's setting up a charity to work with veteran affairs and things of that nature. So like obviously his communal outreach is important. And then, skills on the field. He's versatile. He's won the utility gold glove. He's dependable just about anywhere you put him on the field outside of maybe like shortstop and catcher, which I don't know why you'd put him at catcher, but I'm sure if you put the gear on him, he could catch the ball. So, I mean, but my point being is like he's valuable to you, maybe not as valuable around the league and the industry as he would be to you. And I think that displayed leadership, his versatility, his acumen on defense, which we know, whether we agree with it or not, the Cardinals have traditionally built their teams around defense, and so they value that highly. I don't see him as a piece that they would be willing to move, that they would be entertaining to move. And I have thought for a long time now, and at the beginning of this offseason too, even if they moved money out, I think they would reserve some money to sign him long-term to an extension. I've been pretty steadfast in that belief. And then after listening to him speak at winter warm-up, I'm even more confident in that belief that he is, a member of that leadership core moving forward, and that he is somebody that they will keep around for what he brings. He's like a super gold glove glue guy, if I can describe it. So like he's maybe not your best player or like your all-star, or your tentpole bat or whatever in the lineup, but he's wildly important to your future success. So that's how I think about Brendan Donovan. I'm not really in the mode to trade him. I do think that the Cardinals will probably be in contention, at least for a playoff spot within the next 3 years. So while he's still under team control, if they don't extend him, I believe that he will still be here when that day comes. Our next question comes to us from Legante11. Most comments make it sound like they want close to a fresh start for Heim next year. Who do you see, who will not be on this team next year that all of us would be surprised to see gone? And I will start with Gabe.
Yeah, I was considering that question, looking through the roster, and I don't know if anybody will be surprisingly gone, because I don't know that they're necessarily interested in, like, the fresh slate is like to get the veteran contracts off the books as much as possible. I don't think any of those guys would be a surprise to see gone, and I would be I would be surprised by players who haven't reached free agency, who aren't going to reach free agency for a few years. I'd be surprised to see them gone. If the season goes really poorly, I guess the best answer I could come up with is like Lars Nootbaar. But I mean, if you ask me what the chances of that happening are, I'd say pretty low. So I don't have a good answer for that, because I don't really think anybody who might get traded in the next offseason will be gone, because the main clean slate element is just getting the veterans off the book, putting as little salary commitments as possible so that he can do his own thing. And like I said, anybody who's making any significant amount of money would not be a surprise to see gone, in my opinion.
So it's hard to pick someone that would be a surprise.
Yeah.
Because even like even like Helsley or something like that wouldn't be a surprise. It is tricky. You know what would be a surprise? I don't think he's gonna be gone, but if a player like Wilson Contreras would be gone after saying that he definitely wants to stick around, that would be a surprise.
That would be a
surprise. I could see them finding a really sweet trade and him agreeing to it, and then kind of going back on what he said, which I wouldn't blame him or anything like that, but that would be just surprising, since he seemed very adamant about staying.
I feel like that's
kind of the angle I could go for that question.
I would be
Otherwise,
surprised if he accepted a deal, unless it was like the Dodgers, and like if Freddie Freeman got hurt and like, all of their options at first base were gone, and they were like, let's go see if we can get Wilson. And they like, that's about the only, so I feel like the Cardinals would almost be like, we appreciate everything you're saying and want to do for us, but go win a World Series. Don't worry about us, kind of thing. Yeah, like so.
By the way, they got Will Smith on a 10-year deal.
Yeah,
right.
Oh well, with heavy deferrals too. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
No, I was saying they got Will Smith at catcher.
Will Smith.
I
I was talking about because he's moving to first
specifically,
base. If Freddie Freeman got if his ankle was an
Oh,
issue
I see,
again,
I see.
yeah, and they acquired him to play first. I mean,
I got a name. I just thought of a name, but I don't think he'd really be a surprise either. Herrera. But he wouldn't be a surprise because they got a bunch of catching prospects in the system. That's about all I got.
Adam, do you have a name that you would be? So I have two. Just FYI, I do have two names in my head, but I want to hear Adam first before I throw mine out.
Someone that I would be surprised to still be on the roster next year.
Yes. So what was
or
the
that
question?
wouldn't be.
Yeah. So
I'm surprised
Who
if
will
they're
not
not
be on
there.
the team?
most comments
Most
comments made it sound like they want close to a fresh slate for Heim next year. Who will not be on this team next year that all of us would be surprised to see gone?
That's a tough one because I feel like every name that we think is going to be gone, I think maybe will at some point. I think it's almost like the opposite, where if they're not traded, then I would be shocked. I don't know. That might have been the question, and I'm just probably dumb and I can't understand English. But on that juncture, I think if anything, if there's any guy that I would be surprised to still see there, maybe Sonny Gray, and that might be an unpopular opinion because I just personally believe that it's I can totally see him just not there because there is a year and a half of team control left on his contract, albeit it's not the most team-friendly deal, I will say. So they're going to have to eat some money in order to make it happen. But, if he's still there, it can be pretty interesting.
He's got to agree to it, though. Are you saying that he's going to change his mind? Because the guys
does he have a no-trade clause?
Yes.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Oh,
but he did say, I will throw the caveat out there so you don't feel like, oh man, that was dumb. He did say he wasn't fully convinced going into this season that they still couldn't compete, but he was also asked the follow-up, if the Cardinals fall out of it, would you consider a trade mid-season? He said he would have to see how the season goes before considering anything like that. So there is the caveat that maybe he would consider it going, if they're out of it, but he wasn't there yet. So, I mean, your answer still could ring true. It still could be Sonny Gray.
Okay. Yeah, so that in that case, I could totally see it being Sonny. And I would be shocked if at some point he is not dealt and they don't try to make it work. Even the same thing with Arenado,
Mm-hmm.
So my two names that I have in mind, the first one is Gabe's, is Lars Nootbaar for a couple different reasons. One, he won his arbitration case, and it sounds like arbitration views him favorably. And if he goes out and has a spectacular season that earns him another, significant raise in his ARB 2 year, and he has 2 years of control left, basically, I can see the Cardinals wanting to maximize on that potential. I also can see the inverse where if he fails to live up to it, that they would probably look to move on from him given just the sheer number of options in the outfield. And then the second point to that is they also have now he has to continue on the path that he's continuing to go, but Chase Davis and Lars Nootbaar are of a similar skill set. And so would they entertain keeping Nootbaar around if they have a cheaper, younger version, less injury-prone version of him coming up through the minors? That would be another part of the equation that I would think about. So I think this may be the final season in St. Louis for Lars Nootbaar, regardless of if he does well or if he fails to live up to expectations. And that's not from a place of I love Noot. I love watching him. I love everything he's about. I kind of wonder if the franchise is going to go in a different direction. And if he has a great year, then great. They get to maximize on his value. But if he doesn't, then they're just kind of move on because they can't rely on him. So either way, I think it's probably his last season, in my opinion. The other name that I'm intrigued by that I think might not be around, and I'm going back and forth on these two names, and it's in the bullpen, and it's either Jojo Romero or it's Matthew Liberatore, because they also have, maybe I could throw John King into that as well. You got 3 different lefties out there in the bullpen. Traditionally, bullpens carry 2 to 3, but all 3 of them will be in arbitration. Jojo Romero will have 1.5 seasons left of team control at the deadline this coming year. And so would they look to move one of those names and get some value back while also having two, other guys behind them. I think it would depend on where the team is at the deadline. Again, I think there's going to be a lot of, if they're out of it, I think there's going to be a lot of names available for other teams, and we just never know what kind of will transpire from there. But I think that one of Jojo Romero or Matthew Liberatore could find themselves out as someone we didn't necessarily see coming, but they might another, and I don't mean that also as I'm out on Liberatore. I mean that as I can see another team talking themselves into a left-handed late inning reliever who throws 97 with a nasty curveball and being like, let's go get that guy. And especially some of the teams who value, length and control on those types of arms might jump in on that. So there's, I don't know.
Can I
go ahead?
respond to something?
Yeah.
Well, a couple things. I think Romero would be the opposite of surprising because you trade relievers in these situations. That's just my opinion, though. Liberatore would be a little more surprising because of how many years of control he has. And I would say you'd mentioned that we might trade Newbar because of all the outfield options. I don't think they have a lot of outfield options. Who do you consider all the outfield options?
Well, so I'm looking at Jordan Walker, Victor Scott, Michael Ciani. If Chase Davis establishes himself, they could look at Chase Davis as a potential for next season. That again, it's a little bit contingent upon him continuing down that track and them clearing runway for young players, and it kind of falls in line with that thought process. But at the same time, do what?
Is that like those four guys? Because that's a lot of question marks that I don't think are all going to work out.
There are other. Brendan Donovan is another one that if second base, JJ Weatherholt is another name that you could throw into the outfield mix if he's moved, if there's still an infield log jam and they move him to the outfield.
Okay. I mean, I just don't see like him getting traded for the reason that we have too many outfielders, just because I think Ciani is I like Ciani. I think he's probably a fourth outfielder because he can't hit. And I don't think both Scott and Walker are necessarily a sure thing to work out.
No. I'm not saying that they're sure things, but
Davis too. But I'm saying all of them have to basically work out.
But that's what I'm saying is I could see it happening if the conditions are right. I'm not saying it's set in stone or that I predict it, but I can see how it works out that way, and I can also see a situation where if all of those things work out in the positive sense, then they move on and they get the value for him because they have all of these other options available. But in the inverse, if it doesn't work out to where he gets injured again and they can't rely on him, then they're going to also move on from that standpoint as well and not run it back for a fourth or fifth straight season of not being able to rely on him.
Okay. You did answer the question correctly, because I would be surprised if things all worked out to where he could get traded. Although him disappointing again with injuries, I could see that a little more than him breaking out, personally speaking. Anyway, just wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's where I stand on it. It wasn't like I'm out on Newt and they should move on from him no matter what. And I know that's not what you thought. But I'm saying I can see where they talk. If Chase Davis continues on his trajectory, if Jordan Walker, establishes himself, if Victor Scott is ready to go, that's all three outfield spots pretty much spoken for. You also have Brendan Donovan. You also have JJ Weatherholt. You also, even though we don't look at Michael Ciani as a starting caliber center fielder, that's not necessarily been what, at least last season, that the franchise has shown us that they don't necessarily believe in him as a starting center fielder. So, I mean, that does have to factor into the equation, whether or not we agree with it or not.
I know, but Ciani was a starter because Scott kind of bombed and Carlson kind of bombed. And
right.
Walker
but we also know, like I said earlier,
we don't know what they do if people don't all bomb.
Right. If the Cardinals value defense, and that's the premise of why Ciani would be a starter, is because they value his defense starting every day. And if all of the other offensive pieces are working, in coalition with each other, and they're not worried about whatever offense they get out of center field, that's their defensive first position. And then a majority of baseball rolls that way. They do a lot of.
That's not true.
That's not true?
That's not how baseball. No. I mean, ideally, and I hate to interject here, but the center fielder is one of your core positions up the middle. Ideally, your center fielder is
defensively, yes.
Both. defensively is okay. Yes, he's your defensive anchor, but your center fielder is usually also a very good offensive player in a lot of circumstance, right? So you think about your shortstop, maybe your second baseman, not so much your second baseman, your catcher. Those guys going up the middle are your anchor core, and a large part of the reason why the Cardinals are struggling is because maybe they're getting their defense from Siani, but they're not getting that offense, just like Gabe mentioned, and he's their ninth hitter in the lineup, and whenever it's not him, it's Victor Scott, who is also their ninth hitter in the lineup. So, and then you've got Ivan Herrera, who is probably going to be towards the bottom of that lineup because he's a league average hitter at best that we see right now. Could be trending upwards. But like we said earlier, there is a lot of question marks on this team, especially offensively and up the middle. Mason Wynn, we've got him. I was wrong about him earlier this year or last year. Victor Scott, we don't know what's going on with him. Ivan Herrera is a question mark at best right now, with the potential to be a very good player. So I just think that, to say that, like the center fielder, he's the worst hitter and it could very well be someone that, the Cardinals could get away with having him as their worst player. That's contingent on everybody else up and down their lineup producing at an above average or potential all-star caliber level. And that's just not something you can rely on right now. Like maybe everybody else is very, very good and you have that one weakness, but the Cardinals are not in a position to make that argument right now, or let alone project for it in the future to say, okay, we can get by with Victor Scott or Michael Ciani as our one weak link while everybody else is producing at a playoff caliber situation with their lineup.
No, I agree.
I think they could. I think they could get away with it just because I don't think they're like the idea. I mean, they're trying to contend a little bit, I guess, if that's the idea, if they're trying to contend or if they're trying to retool and give young guys playing time. I guess it depends on what they're wanting to do. But if it's to give young guys playing time, then I don't see why they wouldn't do that.
I will say that I think there's very little chance that both Scott and Ciani work as a starting outfield group because they provide literally the exact same thing. The question is if Scott's bat's going to come around to me, and if it comes around, then he displaces Ciani. I don't think Ciani would be the starting center fielder and Scott would be the starting right fielder. That doesn't make any sense to me.
No,
so,
that was never.
They're
no.
just one basically spot for me.
Yes,
as far as like projecting.
I just don't think that those are going to be what keeps the Cardinals out of the playoffs. Those two players, you know what I mean?
No.
Like they have a lot of holes, so I think you can afford to.
It depends. Like he said though, it depends like what your recipe pieces are because the Dodgers had Miguel Rojas as their starting shortstop, and he was quite bad, but they had literally every other part of the roster. So you can have
exactly,
but that falls into. I'm sorry, that's what falls. That was where I was going with it. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear enough. It's Ciani starting in center field is contingent on everyone else taking that step forward offensively. It's not let's put him in center field just because of what his defense is, and then if everyone else isn't pulling their weight offensively, then they can just let it slide and let the great defender play in center field. That's not my point. If everyone else is taking that step, if everyone else is taking that step, you're not getting that enough offense to sustain yourself in a way that makes you a playoff contender. And I agree with you fully on that, Adam. I'm saying if Walker, Gorman, Arenado, pick your players, Win, Herrera, like Contreras, like if all of these guys, Nootbaar, if they're all performing at, let's say, their 70th to 90th percentile of outcomes that they're projected for, you can get away with Ciani playing in center field, even if he's providing just slightly below league average offensively, and that's fine. But if everyone else isn't taking that step forward, then you're absolutely right. You need 100% more out of that spot. I'm not discounting that whatsoever. I'm also trying to operate from the premise of the Cardinals have shown me that this is how they operate, that this is what they value, that this is what they're trying to accomplish. And whether or not we agree with the Cardinals in their assessment on how they view center field between Scott, Ciani, Nootbaar, whatever, they have their internal evaluation of how they view it, and they value at this current juncture, at least, or what they did last season based off of, Ciani coming in and filling that need in that runway and taking advantage of that opportunity, that they do see him as a valuable asset in center field. Now, the best way to deploy him in terms of like his skill set is as a fourth outfielder, a late game defensive replacement, that guy off the bench. I'm in agreement with every single person who says that to me, and I'm okay with that. I also see an outcome from the real world perspective that is that they're going to put him in center field because they value what he does defensively in center field. And we know that our pitching staff isn't the greatest at limiting contact, isn't the greatest at limiting hard contact. And so a way that they may view a Band-Aid, so to speak, for their veterans that they're running out there is Ciani going out there and running down fly balls that maybe Newt Bar doesn't catch.
And like Jake, I see what you're saying, but you kind of just mentioned, you kind of answered your own question to a degree where theoretically, yes, I understand what yes, if they have the pieces there, then you can get away with a guy like Newbar. But I don't think that, or not Newbar, sorry, Victor Scott or Michael Ciani. I just don't know if that conversation is worth having at this juncture because the pieces aren't there. We know that, and it's not right now. It's not a question. You're really banking on, okay, well, Newbar needs to take the step forward. Walker needs to take the step forward. Gorman needs to rebound to where he was. Wilson Contreras needs to still, maintain production. Brendan Donovan needs to take a step forward. Arenado needs to step forward. That's a lot of ifs. If they were, that's a lot of ifs attached to the idea with Victor Scott being the player that he is and Michael Ciani. So that's what we're trying to say. It's not worth having the conversation about, oh, well, this guy needs to be good. The Cardinals can get away with Victor Scott or Michael Ciani tandem soon if X, Y, Z, ABC happens, right? The contending teams that we talked about who hit that 90 to 95 win threshold don't have as many ifs that they have to answer. The Dodgers just say, okay, well, we can get away with Miguel Rojas at shortstop because we have Shohei Ohtani, because we have Mookie Betts, because we have Freddie Freeman. Or the Atlanta Braves can get away with saying, okay, we have freaking Orlando Arcia, or actually he was pretty good. We have Jared Kelenic in right field, and we can get away with that because we have Michael Harris, because we have Jurickson Profar, because we have Matt Olson, because we have Austin Riley, because we have Sean Murphy, because we have Ronald Acuna Jr. It's not for them. It's yes, we can get away with it because XYZ versus the Cardinals. Hopefully we can get away with it if all these things pan out. And it's just so many question marks, so much entropy to the point where it's just not worth having that conversation. And you might as well redirect your attention to what you can do to quell a lot of those ifs, so then you don't even have to worry about what could potentially go wrong in center field. Where the Cardinals are standing right now, you might as well direct your attention to how you can improve what all the holes that you have instead of trying to say in patchwork, okay, well, we can get away with this guy not playing well, and then hopefully that everybody else plays at the level that we hope that they can get. They played that game the past couple of years, and it bit them in the butt because they tried to patchwork with Eric Fetty and tried to throw in Tommy Pham, and it blew up in their face. Obviously, in that situation, they thought they could contend because they were, the record didn't really get backed up by the run differential, and a lot of people didn't see that. But it's just not a conversation, I believe, and I guess a lot of us maybe don't believe is worth having when there's so many ifs versus other teams say, okay, well, we can get away with one guy because everybody else on our team is rock solid.
Yeah, I know. I agree with the sentiment or the statement, the intention that it's not ideal to go into it expecting it. I don't want it to come off as I'm arguing for it. I'm saying I'm viewing it from the lens of how I think the Cardinals are viewing it. And from that sentiment, based off of their recent track record the last year, showing us that they like Ciani and that in September, they will play him over Victor Scott, even if we feel like Victor Scott has the higher upside, they won't play Lars, or they're talking about wanting to play Lars at the start of the season in center field. Make a believer out of me. Show me that you're going to do that, and I'm fully in. But what they've done traditionally is they will go with defense first in center field, and that's the modus operandi that I'm operating off of based on what they've shown me, not what I think they should do. I think they should start Lars Nootbaar in center field. I think they should try to maximize their offensive output and then bring in a quote unquote hands team later in the game, play lockdown defense, run suppression after you've scored your runs. I don't think it's smart practice to go into the game trying to lock down the other team's offense and trying to scrape by 1 or 2 runs, because then, like you say, your margin of error is cut so razor thin that if anything goes wrong, the game's over essentially. So that's where I'm at. But this
Missourian of you, even though you're not from Missouri. The show me.
Yeah, exactly. Show me. If
this is the show me state. Show me.
I'm operating under what they've shown me. I'm not operating under what I think they should do, and I'm trying to I try to separate those two things.
The question was what would be surprising but might happen, so I think that fits. You're trying,
who will not be on this this all goes back to who will not be on the team next year that's surprised to see gone. So I mean,
we're trying our best out here.
Yeah,
we're trying to answer these questions.
But I feel like it's a good segue into our next question. Which Cardinal position player do you think are most likely to really outperform their Zips projection for this season? Michael Ciani. Mm-hmm. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he might.
Let's go.
I was looking at his FanGraphs page, and he had 64 WRC plus last season in 334 plate appearances, but a 1.1 FWAR because of his defense. It's good defense. It's real good defense. And for center field, that positional adjustment is only like 2.5 wins. So
that's really good, I think. Center field's pretty up there.
No, I don't think so. I just looked it up.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure, but I just looked it up. It said 2.5, what I just looked up, but I might be looking at the wrong thing. But it's 2.5, 12.5 for catcher, 2.5 second base, 2.5 third base, 7.5 shortstop.
That's weird.
2.5 center field.
I didn't know it was the same as second and third. My bad.
Yeah, and then right field and left field are negative 7.5. So most things are like negative. But I might be looking at the wrong thing. Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm seeing the same thing you're saying.
Okay. So that's what that very like low positional adjustment, which I thought it was higher too. That's 1.1 WAR. So I guess I would need to look at innings played rather than plate appearances for defense. But anyway, it could be. Very well could be.
Really quickly, Gabe, what is Jordan Walker's Zips projection? I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, I just had it pulled up.
Oh man, Walker doesn't pop up when you just put Walker. Sorry. Jordan Walker's is 0.8 in almost a full season with a 101 weighted runs created plus. I mean, he's like
great. I'm picking him.
No,
easy answer. Easy answer. Who's going to outperform their Zips projection? Jordan Walker. That dude is primed to break out, and he's going to do it. And I am 100% on the Jordan Walker bandwagon. The train is rolling through the station. Y'all can hop on, but I'm the conductor of this somewhat, and we're going.
I mean, he does have a low bar to beat.
I was trying to remember if that was earlier this off season, which seems like it was a year ago, or if it was a year ago where I answered a similar question to this and I said Jordan Walker because I don't think it can get much worse. and
that's hurtful.
I can't remember if that was last year and then it did get worse, and I jinxed him.
That's really hurtful.
It was earlier this off season.
You can't. You can only do better because you can't do worse. That's golly.
Right. I mean,
to the heart.
I'm picking the safe bet. I'm picking the safe bet, and I don't blame. It's not his fault. I don't think it's his fault at all. I love Jordan Walker. I wrote an article a couple of years ago about Jordan Walker is about to be your next favorite player because I love him. He's fantastic. He's got charisma. He's got the ability. It's just that he's stuck out in the outfield that he's never had a chance to develop at the position. And I keep thinking every year he's going to get more reps in the outfield and his bat will come along like we expect it to, and he's going to break out. And that's what I really, really want to see happen. So I just can't remember if this is the second year in a row I've said that, and if maybe I should stop because I'm obviously not manifesting it for him, or if I said that earlier. Then
no, I'm conducting this train. I'm manifesting it. It's gonna happen this year. 2025 is the year of Jordan Walker.
Yes, I love it. I'm all aboard.
All right, Gabe, give us your who's gonna outperform their Zips projection this year.
I mean, I think I got another pretty easy target. Eric Fedden. He's got a 1.4 projection from Zips, 1.4 wins. I mean, that's it's 4.21 ERA, 4.28 FIP. I mean, if he's really a new pitcher from the KBO, and I do not expect him to be as good as he was last year, to be clear, but like 1.4 is pretty low. I think he can beat that pretty. Like, I think he can beat average. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And some of that's because they only project 26 starts. But even still, I feel like he could probably pitch better than that. And I know he's a year older. He's 32. Hitters have adjusted to him a little bit. He's got to readjust back. But yeah, he feels like an easy answer, quite frankly, looking through the list here, just because it's not a super high bar for him to beat. And if he's anywhere close to last year, he will easily beat it.
And Adam had to leave us early, but we thank him for jumping on and joining us. So we're going to move on to our final question of the night. I'm going to skip over George's question because that just seems contentious, and we've already had enough high-level debate tonight. So what is the ideal number of 2025 shuttle spots on the pitcher side of the roster? Note this includes both starters and relievers. So to kind of give context,
yes, I was going to ask just for everyone else, not for me, because I know what a shuttle spot is, but maybe other people don't. So I what does that mean?
So
for other people,
essentially pitchers or position players, it can also be, but I don't know why you would do it with a position player, but players who are kind of on the fringe of the roster that they can kind of be moved up and down. So like if you end up in an 8-0 game and it's the 5th inning and you bring in your long reliever who has options remaining and he goes out and finishes the last 4 innings of the game and then he gets sent down the next day for a fresh arm who could kind of keep you in the role. That's kind of the idea of shuttling pitchers back and forth. It's traditionally done.
Kind of figured.
Yeah. It's traditional.
It was Chris Roycroft and Kyle
Leahy, and
those were the primary guys.
Luchos did it some too.
Spot.
Yeah.
But so
I was like, is this a fantasy baseball thing that I don't know anything about?
It's just
like
the fringes of the 40 man that can kind of be moved up and down. I'll answer. I'll go first. I think that it's good to have 2 to 3, spots in the bullpen that are, shuttleable, if you can create your own verb, I guess. Shuttleable. You really want to have as many established, reliable guys in as many spots as you possibly can. But to have that added flexibility and to kind of, and I think the Cardinals last season, and they have kind of carried it over this season, the ability to kind of throw numbers at a situation, and specifically in the bullpen, has been a really smart way to kind of just shuttling fresh arms back and forth. There was a certain point, because the Cardinals did rely so heavily on the back end of their bullpen, to where even shuttling guys back and forth didn't benefit them, mid-season, just because those back end guys were really burnt out mid-season and just relied on so heavily. The idea is that your team just kind of chugs along at a pace and you're continuously, churning through these guys up and down. Now you only get 5 options on a player in a season. Once they've, been optioned 5 times in a season, then they actually, I believe, have to pass through waivers after that 5th option to be
if you take them down.
And so you get 5 options in a season, but you get 3 optionable seasons. And so in 3 seasons you can option a player. After that point, after those 3 seasons, then any opportunity to option that player, they have to go through non-revocable waivers, I believe that is, in order to send that player down. So a lot of times, unfortunately, after those pitchers exhaust all of their options, they're usually just non-tendered. So they fill a role, but they don't typically have a very long shelf life.
And then once they're optioned, pitchers have to be in the minors for 15
days, unless of injury, of course. Then a pitcher can be recalled immediately. Yeah.
So that's the tricky part, because I was like, what is the lowest amount that you would possibly want? And I'm like, well, maybe one, because you could always just flip them back and forth. But 15 days is probably too long to only have one.
Right. You want two to
So,
three spots. I mean, 3 is kind of pushing
yeah,
it,
it's like
but at
three
least
starts for 15 days.
at least 2 spots in your so I guess what he's asking is like how many options to be able to go back and forth to. The Cardinals have, I don't know, 6 or 7 at least that I would feel comfortable with in the bullpen, and then probably 2 or 3 guys at the upper minors for a start. You know, between Zach Thompson and Gordon Graceffo, who could probably slide into a spot start in the rotation, you feel at least okay enough about that it wouldn't kill you. I'm not sure about Simmer Bursa. Obviously, Michael McGreevy is another option that I didn't consider off the top of my head, but they have options. That's the point. They have options. We're not quite sure what.
They have options for options.
Exactly. And we're not quite sure what Quinn Matthews is. I'm eager to see what he looks like early in the season at AAA. You know, he kind of talked about going through, maybe experiencing some fatigue late in the season in September. He talked about this at winter warmup, and he was asking his body to do things that it had done all year, but it just wasn't. And so trying to find a way around that is what he said, and just trying to pitch with what he had that day was a learning experience for him, but it also made him less effective than he was the entire season. So I'm eager to see if when they inevitably have him start the season at AAA, and to see how he performs early, and if he gets back on track and is just mowing guys down and striking out the world again, I think that we'll see him probably in St. Louis by June at the latest.
So I'm not responding to you specifically. The question though is, the way I'm interpreting the question is when he says shuttle spots, I think he means like spots in the bullpen that you're willing to send back and forth. The reason I asked that is because he says this includes both starters
and releases, which is I think is interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Which is the confusing element to me. I don't want to shuttle any starters.
Yeah, I agree. That's
yeah.
So that's.
And then I'm wondering if he means how many options, like how many pitchers do you have ready and waiting to shuttle back and forth for both the starting and relieving spot.
If what he means by starters is like starting pitchers in the minor leagues that you're willing to put up in the bullpen in a pinch.
Yeah.
Then I
get it. Spot start in the rotation, I guess, is another way to interpret it. So like just ready to go.
That would not be how you would use the shuttle.
Right.
I mean, I would not refer that as a shuttle anyway.
Me either.
My answer is 2, basically, just because I feel like that the premise of the shuttle spot is that you are okay with sending them down, and I would not like to have more than 2 players that I'd be willing to send down in the bullpen personally.
Right.
And I think as far as like, I mean, the amount of players you have that you want to be able to send up and down. I mean, whatever the answer is, the Cardinals are covered.
Looking at, they have numbers.
They got Lotus, Sponson, O'Brien, Roycraft, Bailey Horn, a bunch of starters. Well, Robersaw, McGreevy, Roddery Munoz, who is listed as a starter on Fangraphs. I think he's a reliever now.
I was gonna say he's my dark horse. I'm really intrigued to watch and see what Roddery Munoz brings to the table as a reliever, because he already featured 97 out of the rotation. So I'm eager to see what that looks like in the bullpen. And he only really needs one, at least average secondary to really take off as a bullpen piece. So I'm eager to see what that looks like in spring.
Yeah, and then there's he's not a shuttle guy, but there's a pretty good chance if Nick Anderson doesn't fall flat in his face and isn't injured, he's going to make the team, which adds another reliever currently.
Yeah, and if he's good, he takes that Kittredge spot as kind of that veteran setup guy, and I mean that would make you feel at least like they're no worse off in the bullpen than they were last year, which should make everyone feel a little bit better about what I guess the floor would be for this team, which is where I've kind of been like, well, what is the floor of this team? Because it's been so hard to assess based off of the amount of ifs and question marks like we talked about earlier. Could this team fall flat on its face and lose 65 games, or could it, win 80, 85? I don't know that 90's in the realm of outcomes that we'd expect, but could it happen? I don't know. Sure. But it's really hard to assess and judge, where this team falls at least its floor, because that's generally, like, for me, a good indicator of how I feel the season is going to go as a whole. And I don't have a really good read on what the floor is of this team going into 2025.
Yeah, and just to add more to it, right now, literally right now, 6 of the 8 people projected for the bullpen have options. So there's literally only 2 guys you can send out. If Anderson makes a team, that's 3. That's a lot of guys you can send out. They weren't happy with the fact that they couldn't send Fernandez down last year or something to that effect. I forgot that's why they didn't get a Rule 5 guy.
It wasn't that they didn't like it. They just didn't like feeling hamstrung by that.
Right.
I don't think that they were regretting so I think that's what kind of gets mixed up in like that conversation is like.
My point was more that, like, because you had Fernandez and Kittredge and then you got the guys too good to send down, which
Right.
Helsley, for instance. So they really couldn't send that many people down last year. This year, you wouldn't send down. You probably wouldn't send down Fernandez unless he takes a step back. Helsley can't be sent down. Romero can't be sent down. Like I said, Nick Anderson, if he makes a team, it kind of depends on what they're doing with Liberatore.
I was going to say, I'd be surprised if Libby got an option, and I'd kind of be a little bit surprised if John King got option at certain points too.
It depends on if they're like, Liberatore, why don't you work your way back up to starter because we have a couple injuries and you'll get a couple.
I would hope
ramp up, but that's about like it, I guess. That would send him down.
I would hope,
have an option
based on the number of options they have to take spot starts, that they wouldn't need Liberatore to stretch back out as a starter and like essentially go through what Palante and Thompson did last season, because they felt they were short and guys weren't taking off and taking that next step and that opportunity. I would hope that they have enough numbers now that are near major league ready, talking about like a Michael McGreevy or I don't know that Sem Robersay is necessarily in that same bucket, but Quinn Matthews is getting closer. They have, 5 starters, like veteran starters established that they plan to go into the season with, or at least so that seems. So I would hope that they, like, if you get to the point where you're asking Matthew Liberatore to go back down to stretch out to become a starter again, things have gone really badly, really fast.
Sure. Well, okay, so they're in a weird spot, actually, in my opinion. Because if you look at the depth of the starters, McGreevy is ready on day 1. And then there's a lot of guys who might be ready in June, but I would be surprised if are ready in April or May. So if things go wrong, like right away,
right,
I can see Liberatore starting games for sure. If things go wrong if they make a bunch of trades at the deadline, I would expect we now have room for Matthews or something. McGreevy's probably already in the rotation at that point. Maybe you give Robertson. So I could maybe even Tink Hence, although I think he might have an Indians concern. But so like it would have to happen immediately, to be clear. But like McGreevy's really the only guy who I'm comfortable with him starting games immedately. I'm not even comfortable with Matthew starting games immediately because he wasn't particularly good in AAA, and I'm tired of rushing players in the majors before they're ready.
Right.
Me personally. And I would take my time a little bit more with Matthews. June maybe, especially if he's dominated in 2 months and somebody goes down and there's a spot open, absolutely. But for the first month or so, I think McGreevy's really the only backup plan, and I could see Liberatore being the second backup plan pretty easily because the Cardinals haven't been hit by injuries too badly the last couple of years, and it happens to every team at some point, and it could happen to us this year.
Well, I think that Zach Thompson would have something to say about being the only backup plan. I think that he's in that mix as well.
I agree with you. In theory, I would put Liberatore over Thompson as far as who I'd give starts to first, because Thompson was quite bad last year.
He was, but he's also said that based off of, and they've made the changes. And I mean, obviously that's going to have to show up in spring. But if he gets back to what he was in 2023 this spring, I think it changes the equation quite a bit.
Oh yeah, no. When I like, so I don't know if you play out of the park baseball.
I don't.
But a lot of times in my head, no. So a lot of times in the head when I map out like, okay, so this player needs to do this, and this player needs to do this. I always think in my head, okay, this is how it is right now. Things could change pretty quickly. So right now, Thompson is not a factor for me. If he looks good in spring training, then he becomes a factor. So that's where I'm coming from with like Liberatore, to me, the 7th guy as of now. That will probably change fairly soon, admittedly, but I think That's why Liberatore's going as a starter right now. People were confused by that, but it's because McGreevy's really the only guy right now who you can trust to start games on day one.
Well, and they also made the argument that if you're preparing for a starter's workload, even as a reliever, that will help you be more prepared to handle more bulk innings out of the bullpen as well. And they've made that argument, so I could understand why they would be telling guys of that ilk to be preparing as if you're also going into the season as a starter, just so your body is built up enough to handle that type of workload, if that makes sense.
Yes, and he's also, by the way, 25 this year.
Yeah.
Like it's not out of the realm of possibility that suddenly he can start. To me,
sure.
I'm not saying
I also liked what I saw from him out of the bullpen, and I feel like he's well geared towards, his stuff plays up in that role, in that capacity. And what we saw, he was very hit and miss, not in a way that you would want, right? You not swing and miss. He was hit and miss in the rotation, and I think he found a lot more stability and consistency in the bullpen. And so I think that's honestly, from how I viewed it, where his future,
sure.
is.
No, I agree with you. My premise is sort of predicated on the idea that.
No, I'm just saying, going forward, I don't see him as a starter, but if he needs to start in a spot opportunity because everything has gone wrong, sure. But going forward, I would like for him to be a reliever.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that wraps it up for us tonight. We've went an hour and a half, and I'm sure by this point, just about everybody's tired of listening to us. So if you made it this far, congratulations. We don't have a prize for you, but that deserves some sort of trophy.
Great questions.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much
really interesting questions.
For all your questions. They inspired some great debate, and I hope you all enjoyed it because my voice is getting tired and I'm getting tired, and I'm sure these guys are getting really tired of hearing me. So for Heather Simon, for Gabe Simons, and for Adam Akbani, my name is Jake Wood. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Viva Alberto's podcast. Have a great night. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Viva Albertos podcast. Make sure you go over to X and follow us at Viva Albertos. Also, if you're listening to this on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button and also hit that bell so you can be notified the moment that our episodes are released to the public. So make sure you go and do that, and have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.